Usually we get. Hello. Welcome to our next Black Psychiatry Town Hall. Thank you everyone for joining us again. My name is Dr. Dr. Hairston, and I am a psychiatrist and residency program director at Howard University in DC, and I'm also the president of the APA Black Caucus. So we're just gonna jump right into it. I'm gonna introduce our panelists. We have assembled a great group of leaders here, and I'm excited that they've all agreed to join me here on this Monday evening. So first we have Dr. Sarah Vinson. We're not gonna go in alphabetical order today. We're gonna go the reverse, because sometimes those at the end of the alphabet feel left out. So Dr. Sarah Vinson, who is a physician who specializes in adult child forensic psychiatry. She's the founder of the L'Oreal Psych Group in Atlanta. She's also a fellowship director at Morehouse University, and she is the founder and senior editor of Ourselves Black magazine. So, hello, Dr. Vinson. Welcome.
Hey.
Welcome back. Thank you. We also have Dr. Nia Hurd-Garris, who is a pediatrician and researcher in the Department of Pediatrics at Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern, and an advocacy center at Ann and Robert Lurie Children's Hospital in Chi-Town, Chicago. Hello, Chicago in the house. Welcome. Dr. Hurd-Garris is a pediatrician, but we love her here in the psych world because she talks about the effects of adverse experiences in childhood and health on mental health, as well as she is one of the active chairs and founding members of the provisional section of Minority Health and Equity for the PEDS group. So hello, Dr. Hurd-Garris, welcome. We also have Jamil Hamilton, who is our youth. We love to hear from the youth advocates here at Black Psychiatry to keep the people going. So he's the manager of public policy and advocacy for NAMI, New York City. He was born and raised in South Central LA. You're the only West Coaster, I think, here. Okay. And he went to college in DC. Which college was that?
I went to Georgetown.
Oh, I thought he went to Howard. Okay, next. He has been traveling for a bit, but now he is settled and putting down roots in New York. And we also have a Black psychiatry fave here, family, Dan Gillison, who is an expert nonprofit leader. He is the chief executive officer. That means he's the big boss of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. He has a passion for advocating for people with mental illnesses and also for young Black psychiatrists and Black psychiatry, period, if you didn't know about that. He previously led the American Psychiatric Association Foundation before coming over to NAMI. So hello. Virtual hugs, Dan. Hello.
Yeah. Back to you.
Thank you. And of course, last but not least, we have Professor Andrea Dennis, who is the Dean for Faculty Development and John Bird Martin Chair of Law at the University of Georgia School of Law. She has done a lot with criminal defense lawyering, race and criminal justice, criminal informants and cooperatives, youth advocacy. She even wrote a book. Yes, she wrote a book, everyone. Rap on Trial, Race, Lyrics, and Guilt in America. So I don't know how, but somehow I got her to be on this panel. So we are gonna learn and take in all the knowledge here. So welcome to the panelists and thank you for joining us. So I'm gonna start with some questions. Yes, what a group we have assembled. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna start with some questions here and then we're going to allow you and the audience to participate as well. So the first question I'm gonna discuss, as we know, we are in BIPOC or Minority Mental Health Month, BB Moore Campbell Mental Health Month, and that is something we definitely need to discuss at this time because obviously, as you know, we've been going through a lot with the COVID-19 pandemic, health disparities, and also with continued racial and social injustice. And I just want to make sure that we take a moment and shout out and acknowledge the death of Senator John Lewis. So he was a big Congressman, John Lewis. So he was a big advocate for making good trouble. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to make good trouble. We're going to stand up and we're never going to back down, just like he encouraged us all. And if you are here in the DC area, you know that he is lying in state and you can go there with a mask on. Okay, socially distance. Thank you. So let me just start with one question for Dan Gillison, because we are partnering with NAMI, and I really appreciate that NAMI has agreed to work with me, a doc named Danny, and Black Psychiatry in this. So Dan Gillison, tell me, children are struggling, so are their parents. What is NAMI doing to support parents during this time?
As I go to answer the question, let me first thank you all for choosing the professions that you've chosen and the work that you do. Navigating to the point that you are and to get to this level in your professions has taken so much that there's no way that we can actually acknowledge all of your work to get to this point. And I just want to thank you for your leadership and choosing to go into the professions that you have. And on behalf of NAMI, our board, our staff, and our affiliates, we appreciate you and just appreciate the work that you do. And in terms of answering your question, we have a program for parents called Basics on Demand. And it's a virtual program that is 6 sessions, and it is to help educate parents on how to identify. 50% of mental illness is identified by the age of 14, but a parent may not know if their child has a mental illness or if it's just that young matriculation going through life and peer pressure. So we have a program, and it's 6 classes. You can take it online, self-paced, and it's called Basics on Demand. And it actually teaches, it informs, it exposes, and it transfers information to parents on what to look for, resources that they can call on, and how to navigate as they're trying to identify the what's going on with their child. And it's not just for parents; it's for caregivers, it's for grandparents, it's for aunts, uncles, it's for anyone that is in the life of a young person. And that course is one that, by the way, since COVID, we have seen 27,500 registrations for that course.
Wow. Okay. Well, you answered my question. I think we now know what resources NAMI has for children and family. So we need to know those because we're about to get into some deep conversation here. Dr. Vinson, tell me, how does experiencing and viewing images of racist violence affect children's mental, developmental, and physical health?
So it is absolutely a form of trauma, right? Broadly defined, trauma is something that undermines your sense of safety and security in the world. So when you see people being harmed, people that you relate to who look like you, who look like your uncle, your mom, your cousin, there's a way that you relate to being in that position of being in danger. And there's another level added to it when the person who's doing the harming is someone who is supposed to be the person who protects you. So you have a form of violence there, but you also have this structural violence overlay where not only is there trauma, but there's trauma from the system that you're supposed to call if you need help. And so it absolutely has negative impacts on children. And I would encourage families, caregivers, not to allow your children to see those images. Sometimes we want them to see it because we want them to understand what's going on or know about racism. And there are ways to teach them about racism that don't involve them seeing people literally murdered.
Thank you for that. I think that that's something that we think about a lot. Dr. Hurd-Garris, the pediatrician in the house, I'm going to ask you the same question, but just with a little further. So we've heard about how racism can affect mental health, developmental, and physical health. So you can comment on that. But I really want to know, because you are CNN and Sesame Street expert on how to talk to your children. How do we talk to Black children about racism, and when is the right time? You happen to be the mother of a Black male child growing up in Chicago, who is also my godson everywhere. And how do you talk to them? What do we say? How do we even get this conversation together?
Ooh, we're starting off with like hard questions from the beginning, but I appreciate it. I think just like in science and medicine, it depends. That's not a satisfying answer, but I think it's a real one. I don't think there's a blanket way to be able to talk to, my 7-year-old and someone else's 5-year-old. I think it's all different. My son had very early experiences with racism. So we have had these conversations earlier than I personally would like to. I'm a person who studies racism and the impacts of racism on child health. And so I know inherently, what the impacts are on their physical and also mental health. And so I want to protect him and I want to keep him safe, and I don't want to expose him to the trauma that we were just talking about. And at the same time, when your kid is going through it and that they're going to go through it at some point in time, you don't want them to go through the world and think something's inherently wrong with them. And that's sometimes what happens. If you don't have those conversations, they think, oh, something's wrong with me. This is why I'm being treated like this, when really something's wrong with society. So I think parents should use their intuition, right? And try to talk to their kids at a time that they feel is appropriate, and use language so that they feel is appropriate as well. Honestly, I think those conversations are going to happen sooner than most parents would like them to happen, especially Black parents. But it's better coming from you than seeing something on the news or hearing from friends. And in my case, my son, his friend told him they only play with white kids. And so my son said, okay, I'm white, right? When clearly he's not white. And so those conversations happened early for us.
Yeah, that's rough, and I guess we'll talk more about how to talk to kids. What are we gonna say? Because I'm not accepting any racist comments to my godson out here. I don't know if I have to catch a flight to Chicago with my mask on. Professor Dennis, you have dedicated your work to youth advocacy and combating the cradle to prison. You've even said now cradle to prison. Some people say school to prison, but we're taking it even further back. I appreciate that, because we are in a system of systemic racism. So you're calling it cradle to prison pipeline in the Black community. As a lawyer, as a law professor, how have you seen trauma impact Black children in the carceral system? So just for some language out there, we say the carceral system here. We don't say the justice system at Black Psychiatry.
So thank you. Let me at least first give credit to the Children's Defense Fund, who coined the phrase cradle to prison pipeline. Certainly we hear school to prison pipeline and we're thinking K through 12 and children being pushed out or excluded. The Children's Defense Fund coined cradle to prison pipeline because we recognize that those critical years, 0 to 6, there is also a significant amount of impact on children that affects their growth into childhood and then into adulthood. So I don't want to say that phrase is my own, but I do use that phrase because I want to recognize we're talking from birth all the way through and into adulthood. And so let me say also that the impact I've seen is on 2 levels. So we can start with parents and caregivers, which a few of us have talked about as a theme already. It's important to recognize that any trauma that parents or caregivers of children have experienced or are feeling or processing or not processing, right, flows to their children, rubs off on them, may cause them to have difficult relationships with their children or maltreat their children. And that can then in turn affect how children enter into and experience the carceral system or the criminal legal system, because as you said, we don't necessarily talk about a justice system. So let's not forget the parents and caregivers and their particular trauma as we're talking about youth. But then for children, let me just start with the proposition we should all accept and understand that trauma negatively affects every aspect of a child's experience of the carceral system, from entry to their treatment within the system, to whether and how they exit the system and their life thereafter, from childhood into and through adulthood. So I'll just give 3 quick examples if folks aren't particularly familiar with the criminal legal system and its treatment of youth. So an adolescent who may have been abused in the home, and you can talk about any variety of abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, that child runs away or is thrown away, kicked out of the house. And to self-support, to self-care, they commit crimes, petty crimes, maybe theft for food, for a little bit of money. Maybe they engage in prostitution to make money, or maybe a more serious crime, drug dealing. But in any event, that trauma leads them to engage in criminal activity, and then they're caught, convicted, and caged, right? So that's one way we see that trauma can directly impact entry into the system. Those children who enter the system with trauma, which most do, most children in the criminal justice system, criminal legal system, have experienced some form of trauma, are further traumatized by the system. Maybe if they're placed in custody, they experience abusive treatment by other youth or by corrections officials. Maybe they're placed in solitary confinement, which for a healthy individual, as many people know now during the pandemic, social isolation is traumatic. But now imagine that you have a traumatized child in custody and you place them in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. That's a problem. Some of those children are forcibly medicated. And then the last example I'll give is that maybe a child who has had a challenging background with few social and emotional supports is convicted or adjudicated a delinquent. That child is likely to receive a harsher disposition or sentence in comparison to one without that trauma, in comparison to a child who does have social and communal supports, right? Because there's no one there necessarily in court to vouch for them, no one to stand by them and offer support and say, I'm going to make sure this kid does what's being asked of him or her. And they're often viewed as lacking options for rehabilitation. So again, just coming back to my initial statement about children, it negatively affects every aspect of their experience within the criminal legal system.
Okay, I mean, I guess we could stop the panel. I don't think she just dropped the mic there for us and explained everything. So thank you for that, Professor Dennis. Jamil, now you are a young Black male. You are a peer who advocates for mental health through NAMI. But through your lived experiences and work with NAMI, what do you identify as the biggest issues impacting mental health, just life for youth who are trying to thrive and just have some sort of sanity and maintain some sort of sanity in the Black community?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And thank you so much for having me on this panel. Really, can everyone hear me? Okay, really excited to really excited to participate. So I would say when I think of some of the biggest issues facing the Black community, and especially youth, Black youth, I think you have to go, number one, think about the limited access to mental health care and culturally competent providers in the community. In order to get healthcare and really get the mental health care you need, in order to get on the path to recovery you need, it's really important that you have providers in your community that you can access, and that these providers are culturally competent so that they're able to work with you and that they're able to understand you and that they really get you. Another issue I would say is, and we've kind of touched on it already, is the structural racism. And often this comes in the form of policing. So structural racism and over-policing often lead to, like we discussed, racial trauma. It leads to anxiety. It can lead to a host of mental health conditions. So, growing up as a young Black man in South Central LA, these are things that I experienced myself. Growing up, and going in stores, knowing that you're being watched, that you're being followed. Being in a group with your friends, and police police are watching you or stopping you or asking you where you're going. I've been pulled over for literally just not having. I got a new car. I was really excited. I got pulled over because I didn't have license plates on my car. This is LA. Like, we don't have a public transportation system. Everyone has a new car, like every 6 months or so. So me not having a car is not that big of a deal. I was also not driving a Toyota Corolla. The model of the car should have mattered, but I'm driving a Corolla, not a Benz, not a BMW, not a Charger. ultimately I was a young Black man in a new car. And so that's why I got stopped. And then then LAPD asked me, they told me they stopped me because I didn't have plates. And then they said, they asked me, do you have any tattoos? I have no idea what a tattoo and what do tattoos have to do with the traffic stop, right? And it honestly caused me a lot of anxiety for a while. You know, I didn't want to drive at night. It was a really scary experience, and that's something that a lot of Black youth deal with, not just whether as young adults or growing up. So, and when we think about over policing, not just in communities but also in schools as well, right? How many schools have school resource officers, aka school cops, have plenty of school cops, but don't have mental health professionals. You know, there aren't social workers, there aren't guidance counselors, there aren't folks that can really provide support to youth, which is another really big issue that's impacting Black youth, the lack of support in the educational system, the mental health support specifically. Like Dan said, we know that 50% of all lifetime mental illness begins by age 14. In addition, 1 in 6 U.S. youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year. So really, youth mental health is a real issue, and teachers and school staff are ultimately on the front lines of childhood mental health and youth mental health. And we really aren't giving them the tools that they need so that they can be prepared. And we aren't also making sure that school staff have the materials that they need, or the schools have the staff that they need to provide support to students and also families. Thank you for bringing that up. Families and caregivers, to make sure that they have the resources that they need as well to provide for their students. So I think what we really see is a structural breakdown, really when it comes to access, education, and over policing and structural racism that results in Black youth not only having their mental health really just degraded and worn down, but we're not also giving them any support or benefits to help fix or recover.
Okay, another mic drop over there. Jamil, you better come through. Excuse me, you came through with the stats, because sometimes people always want to undermine experiences and ask, where's the data on that? So you came through with the experiences and the data. You're ready. You can come over to Black Psychiatry, please, any day. Because we're fighting oppression and structural racism every day. All right. So that gives me a good segue to ask Dan Gillison, the CEO of NAMI. Jamil just told us what they need. So they need more support. They need more education. They need more information for their families. They need more than just policing in schools, but maybe some support and activities, maybe some motivation, maybe some inspiration. Does NAMI have services for children and teens who are coping with mental health issues, as Jamil just brought up? I mean, growing up as a Black child, you have anxiety. Just driving your car. I've also been pulled over, let me say, because I was Black and I was driving down the street. So Dan Gillison, please tell us that NAMI has some type of services for children and teens who are coping with living while Black and also having mental health diagnoses. Dan, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Dude, I'm sorry. I was following the instructions. When you're not talking, go on mute. So now, in terms of answering your question, let me first start by saying that I don't know if it would surprise you all, but I was stopped twice 2 years ago. So as you look at this story and you bring it full circle in terms of experiences, we all live these experiences, and to a great extent, sometimes before video, that was not realized from the standpoint of our experience. Now going to what you asked about young people. Yes, we have a program called Ending the Silence. It's a program that's between 50 minutes to an hour, and it's delivered by young peers like Jamil at high schools, and it's it's individuals talking about their experience, because one of the things we know is that that young person relates to someone like them, and we want to meet them where they are. And these are young people who have had experiences that they can speak to. And the Ending the Silence is a program that we deliver in middle schools and high schools. This program allows for the young people to hear from a peer, like a Jamil, and hear about their experience, and to hear about their lived mental health condition, and to then say, hey, I can relate. So we do have that program and deliver it across the country. Through our 600 affiliates, you can learn more about it and have us come out and deliver it to your school. I will also say that a call to action is we need more peers of color. So I would offer to you that if you know young people that can participate in this program, that's our call to action, because it is a program that works. And we need more young people like Jamil in our body of work to help get the message out to our high schools and our middle schools.
Okay, thank you. I knew NAMI was going to come through with something, some support out there, because we need that, because I'm about to get into another tough question over here. Dr. Vincent, frequently in psychiatry, mental health, we see and observe and find the overdiagnosis of conduct and, my favorite, oppositional defiance disorders in Black and brown children. Why is this? And are we missing trauma? Are we missing depression? Are we missing something else that could be going on? Okay, everyone's following their directions.
So I followed the first part of the directions. It was the second part about unmuting myself. But, you know, our society has a hard time acknowledging the pain of Black people, whether that is Black people with sickle cell anemia or Black women giving birth. Like, to acknowledge Black people's full humanity is to acknowledge American injustice in a way that we still are not ready to do. And I think that the way that trauma, depression, anxiety isn't recognized in Black children is another extension of that. If we look at the things that some of these children are dealing with, if we look at the way that most of the adults around them and the systems around them have shown themselves not to be trustworthy, then we would understand why the kid can look oppositional sometimes. And so I think it starts with our society's difficulty acknowledging the humanity of Black people, and by extension of Black children. We know that Black children are often thought of as being older than they are and not being as innocent as other kids, and so they don't get that same benefit of the doubt or consideration or empathy or sympathy from their evaluators. You know, another part of the problem is our very own diagnostic system. There are certain traumas that we acknowledge as category A for PTSD and other ones that we don't. So there's nothing in that diagnostic classification that looks at things like structural violence or community violence. And so when that, or racism for that matter. And so if you can't meet criteria there, what people end up doing is focusing on the behaviors and not looking at the root of it. And what we see too is that, you know, for a child to tell you about their depression, their fear, their anxiety, their trauma, you have to have a rapport with them. You have to sit down and talk to them. They have to trust you. Whereas if you look at the ODD or CD diagnostic criteria, you don't have to get any information from the child. You can get all of that from their DJJ record, right? So there's I'll just say it. Sometimes I think mental health professionals are lazy and look at what's easily accessible rather than looking deeper. And when it's a Black child, because we already associate Black with bad, that's enough of an explanation. We don't need to look deeper and understand what the root of this is.
Okay, I see we are just coming with all of the tea and the truth today. Somebody is telling the truth over here. I am going to go back now to Professor Dennis because Dr. Vincent alluded to something that we also see. We see in psychiatry, but we also see in the community and we see with the police. When we think about police interaction with Black children, for example, the killing of Tamir Rice, research finds that Black boys are viewed as older and less innocent than whites. How do you see this impact? Or maybe is there an impact in the legal system?
So the short answer is absolutely yes. All right. And let me say two things before I do my usual three examples. The first, as to older and less innocent, I would add, certainly in the criminal justice system, lawyers who work with Black youth would agree that Black children are viewed also as more criminally sophisticated, more aggressive, and more dangerous. And those are important characterizations for how they're treated throughout the entire phase of the criminal legal process. So again, how Black boys, how Black youth are characterized affects every phase, every experience within the criminal legal system. So we can start with police-citizen interactions on the street, and Jamil alluded to this. And in your question, you talked about Tamir Rice, who was an obvious example involving the most extreme, violent, deadly response. But the view or the perspective on Black boys affects all sorts of routine police practices, such as when Jamil talked about he's pulled over, there's a traffic stop, right? The fact that it's a Black youth, Black boy, Black man driving a car, affects whether they're stopped, right? And how they are questioned. So that question about, do you have any tattoos? I'll just answer that for you. The reason they're asking, particularly in LA, but in all major urban environments, in many even suburban and rural environments, is because tattoos are viewed as indicative of gang membership. And so depending on the tattoo you have, they would enter your name into a gang database, Cal Gang database. And they would enter your tattoo. And that would be the beginnings of a record indicating that you are a member of the gang. So to ask that question, they just, if they get an answer out of you, they're just going to enter that and file it away, even if they didn't arrest you or give you a citation. The perception of Black boys, Black youth also affects, for example, frisks or pat downs. So if they pull a Black youth out of a car and they're going to conduct a pat down for their safety to look for weapons, maybe contraband, are they going to do it minimally invasively, or are they going to be very aggressive? Is it going to be a violent pat down? Are they going to be invasive and really trying to grope and in some sense intimidate and harass and shame Black youth as well while they're looking for their contraband or other weapons? We see it affect interrogation. Black boys who are interrogated are treated quite often just as adults would be. In some jurisdictions, there are special protections for youth, but in many jurisdictions, there may not be, or they may not be adhered to. Maybe a prominent example that many are very familiar with now involved the Central Park Five. I know it's a dated case, right? But the question is always asked, well, how would you have a false confession out of these boys? Well, it's because of the interrogation tactics that are used and the treatment of young boys while they're being interrogated as if they were adults. And that can be a very different experience for a youth. And then the last two examples, in a trial, for example, how a prosecutor might characterize the child who is a defendant, how jurors view or perceive the child as a defendant. I mean, literally, what do they see when they lay eyes on the child? Is it a youthful innocent engaging in just boys will be boys, foolishness, or is it a dangerous monster? Every decision that turns on whether the child is amenable to treatment or rehabilitation is my last example. So remember I said I wanted to add to older and less innocent, also more criminally sophisticated, more aggressive, more dangerous. So all of those decisions that turn on whether a child can be treated and rehabilitated, right, including whether to pursue juvenile versus adult criminal charges, the decision to pursue more serious or less serious charges, whether that child is detained or released, are they giving a custodial sentence? All of those decisions turn on not just the behavior or the conduct, but also the perception of that child as to whether they can be fixed. Can they be redeemed? Will they be a danger in the future? So again, my phrase, right? How we perceive Black boys, Black youth affects every aspect of their experience and treatment within the criminal legal system.
Okay, I'm learning over here. I'm sorry. I almost forgot to take myself off of mute because I was over here just absorbing all of the information. All right, thank you for that, Professor Dennis. So can I just, a little off script here, does Jamil or any other Black or brown or anyone living in this systemic racist society have to identify their tattoos? Do they have to tell the police that they have tattoos?
They don't necessarily, if they just ask the question. You have your Fifth Amendment's right to remain silent, right? So you can invoke that at any time. You don't have to respond to questioning. I'm hesitating because the mere fact that you don't have to respond to questioning doesn't mean that there may not be some other way they see it. If they pull you out of the car and they just see the tattoo on your arm because you're wearing a sleeveless short or a short sleeve shirt, they can just by mere observation say, I saw John Doe with what appeared to be a tattoo from a certain gang on his arm, and they can document that, right? So keep in mind, you do have your right to remain silent, your right not to respond to questioning, but that doesn't mean necessarily that there aren't other routine police practices that will allow officers to gather more information.
Thank you for that. That's just so subjective, but I guess these are questions that we need answers to prepare our children for navigating this world. So Dr. Hurd-Garris, I'm gonna go off script a little bit, but I know you know this answer, so I'm ready. I know you're ready.
Okay.
Can you tell me just what are ACEs? You hear that term. So can you just tell me what are ACEs and how do they affect the mental health and the physical health of our children? I know this is your research topic that you love to discuss. So.
Well, first, can I just say I'm like furiously taking notes over here. So I hope all the listeners and watchers are doing that too. They're just like, everybody's just dropping knowledge. I'm like, yes, aggression, criminally sophisticated, like all this stuff. I'm learning so much. So I do study ACEs, and that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So this was kind of a landmark study done by Dr. Vincent Folletti from Kaiser and the CDC. It was a partnership that they did in the 90s, and they did a study where it showed that experiences in your childhood impact your health as an adult. And he was kind of blown away by this finding. So abuse, neglect, having a parent incarcerated, having parents that are divorced, having a parent or a caregiver that had a mental illness, or witnessing domestic violence, these kind of experiences and others, he found an association between that and poor health in adulthood. And so that has been like taken off like wildfire in medicine, and people are like, oh, so what happens in your life socially impacts your health. That's revolutionary. So it's kind of like the social science folks have known this for years, and medical folks are just coming to the realization as a community that social experiences, especially negative ones, of course, are going to impact your health as you age. So there was a group in Philadelphia that said, okay, but you're forgetting community violence, you're forgetting discrimination. These are experiences that are disproportionately experienced by youth of color. So this group in Philadelphia, Dr. Roy Wade and his co-authors said, we need to expand this because this idea of ACEs is so limited. The original ACE study was done in California, in the suburbs, mostly white men, college educated. So they felt in Philly that it didn't really capture experiences of people of color. And so then they expanded that to consider discrimination and consider community violence and other things. And so of course there's a relationship to what happens to you in your childhood and how that you can't, you don't just automatically step out of that when you turn 18. And so when I do that work, the reason why I start with ACEs is because doctors have started to buy into that and say, oh, okay, I guess there's a relationship. I can understand why you're studying it. When I lead from my other vein, when I say, you know, I'm a person who cares very much about structural racism, and I study that, and I want to understand the impact of racism on the mental and physical health of children and adolescents as they age. People are like, okay, but you're not a sociologist. Like, why do you care? You're not a psychologist. Why do you, you know, what is the relationship to health? So when I talk to a group of doctors, I start with ACEs. Hey, things that happen in your youth impact your health. One of those things is racism, discrimination, so on and so forth. And they're like, oh, okay, I get it. But to everybody else, of course they know that racism is an adverse experience, that it's not a one-time thing, it's ongoing, and it's perpetuated over generations, and it impacts health. One of the things that I feel like people are starting to understand is birth outcomes is one very real kind of manifestation of structural racism, and seeing the disparities and not only in maternal mortality, but also low birth weight, infant mortality, and the disparities by groups. And I think that idea of, wow, racism really does impact health, and not only when you're older, but straight from when you're born. And so I use all of that to try to explain to doctors and medical healthcare providers that racism is bad for your health. I root it in ACEs, but it's obviously a much larger conversation, and I'm grateful that we're having it today.
Well, thank you for that knowledge dropping over there. For everyone who didn't know about ACEs, and racism is an ACEs. So okay. All right. So Jamil, as Dr. Hurd-Garris told us, doctors are now listening. They're all on board. They're now listening and trying to understand how it's possible that Black people have been oppressed for generations and it's affecting them. They didn't know that before. So now, while we have their attention, Jamil, please, because this is news to some. Let me get closer. This is news to some, Jamil. So please, while we have our 5 minutes of fame here to discuss the oppression and the systemic oppression that we have been just receiving for generations, how can we empower youth and advocate for policies to help members of the Black community, particularly the youth and the children, that have been historically underserved and marginalized and forgotten? How can we advocate for them, and what do we need to do?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, and I really appreciate the framing of it as well, because it's true. It is like, oh yeah, oh wow, it's wow. Black people have been telling the truth. Racism is real. Oh my God. So it is really exciting that now we do have the spotlight, and that there is a real opportunity now to discuss some solutions. So I'm the manager of public policy and advocacy for NAMI New York City. So some of the things that we've really been working on and advocating for include, one, investing in early intervention, and working to integrate mental health education and support into our school system. So how can we make sure that there's trained mental health professionals on staff, and also making sure that school staff are getting trained on how to support students that are dealing with mental illness? I think another big thing, another way we can support Black youth is by shifting funding away from police departments and reinvesting that money directly into historically underserved and Black communities. Reinvesting in things like mental health services, like community organizations like NAMI New York City and NAMI, investing in things like more school counselors, that can really have a tangible impact. And I think another thing to do is really asking community members and youth, what do they want? What do they need? Something that we really believe at NAMI New York City is the people closest to the pain should be closest to the power. Another way to put this is that people closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So we really believe that let's ask the folks who are being, let's ask Black communities, let's ask youth, what do they need, and once we ask these folks, ask these communities, what do they need, create an agenda that, I think it becomes about organizing, create an agenda, figure out what are the solutions, and then find ways to hold elected officials accountable, and making sure that they know how you want to see them support Black communities and support Black mental health. So at NAMI New York City, one of the ways we do that is through our Advocacy Ambassador Program, which is where we train folks, you have to be 18 and up, but we train folks on how to talk to your elected official, how to build a relationship. And then we have a network of grassroots advocates who are committed to pushing mental health advocacy and helping NAMI New York City achieve our policy priorities. So, I think having that grassroots ethos and really having being humble enough to understand that you don't have all the solutions. And so you need to talk to community members to figure out what those solutions are, is really a big part of it. So yeah, I'm really happy what we've been doing at NAMI to help advocate for and push for some of these policy solutions. And also, we have our ears open to figure out what are the other things that we should be doing.
Okay, thank you, Jamil. I think what I heard you say is that we need to actually listen. This is what I have to sometimes say in my training. Are you listening or are you talking in your session? So I think it sounds like you're saying we need to actually listen. Okay, all right, I got that. Now let me ask another off script question here, and maybe anyone can answer. But Dr. Hurd Garris, since you are the CNN Sesame Street expert, if you guys didn't know, and you can still go see this online, Dr. Hurd Garris, we're so proud of her. She was on CNN, their Sesame Street town hall for children, talking about racism. So Dr. Hurd Garris and other panelists also, if you have ideas, also Dr. Vinson, what do we say to our kids when they experience when they have some type of racist experience where they experience injustice, or even when they're looking at television and saying, like, what's going on here? Like, why do people hate Black people? I've heard this. Why do people hate Black people? Or why are they mad at us? How can we approach this? And also, are there resources?
Oh, that was a good one. First of all, you're the best hype woman in the world, so thank you. There are resources. Let me start there. EmbraceRace.org is a really good site that I like, because they have a parent action plan, like how you're going to talk to kids about racism. I think there are a couple of different ways you can do it. I think when you're in the moment and something has happened to your child and they are coming to you, you don't have time to pull out your action sheet and say, oh, first I'm going to talk about this and then I'm going to talk about that. Your first responsibility is to your child, and to make sure that they know you're there and you are their protector, and you're trying to keep them safe, and processing what happened and reassuring them that this is not their fault. This is not because of anything that they have done, that there are people in the world and there have been things that have happened in our country's history that have not been good for Black people. And so I think there are a whole bunch of different ways to approach it. So if it is just a conversation that you are trying to initiate with a child, especially a younger child, I really like using books. I think books are a really good way to start to have the conversation. So we have a book when my son was much younger, by Taye Diggs, called Chocolate Me. And at first I really didn't love it, because it is a book about this beautiful chocolate boy that his friends are like making fun of him about his skin. Is your skin made of chocolate? Like, why do you look like that, kind of thing? But we were able to use that to have a conversation about everyone looks different, and that's beautiful and that's amazing. And those kids, weren't doing the right thing, or were misinformed about the beauty in that, and having that be kind of the initiating kind of conversation. I think for older kids that are on socials, that are looking at news, it's best to be in the room with them when they're seeing the news, if that's how you choose to, spend your time together. But otherwise, you should talk to them and say, hey, what have you heard? There's been a lot of stuff going on. What have you heard about? And then using that as a way to understand where they are. Because if you're like dumbing stuff down to them, they're gonna be like, well, why is she, hiding this from me? Like, clearly I know that there's riots happening and protesting happening because George Floyd was killed. So why is she like talking about this other thing? On the flip, if they haven't heard a lot of that stuff, and you're going on a soliloquy about like all the stuff that's happening, you might inadvertently traumatize them, and they're not ready for that. So I think understanding where they are, engaging with their knowledge is a good starting point for most kids. One of the things that I've found fascinating in the research with respect to racism is that children, when they're exposed to racism, obviously it's not good for their mental health. But one of the kind of mediating factors, one of the things that helps to turn some of those outcomes around is involvement in activism. So whatever that means, right? So that could be, going down, marching, and doing whatever that child feels like is making a difference. That could be writing a letter to a congressperson. That could be whatever, talking to their white friends, or, whatever it is. But that feeling like you have the power to make a difference has been one of the factors that we've been able to see that actually make kids feel like, I can do something about this. This is not such a terrible story that like nothing's ever going to change. Like, why was I born a Black person? It's something that they can be empowered by, and not just for Black kids. Obviously, white kids need to be empowered too, and be fixing this problem that have been created by their ancestors. So I think there's so many things to do, and you have to kind of listen to your kids and be there with them to help them process all the terrible stuff that's happening right now and been happening for years, quite frankly.
Ooh. Well, thank you. Thank you. More. I'm over here learning. Okay. So I hadn't even thought about that, like giving them actionable items, like things that they can do to feel empowered. See, this is why I need y'all. This is why we need this panel.
And just quickly, part of that is having an idea of what it means to be Black that's not dictated by the prevailing narratives of American society of what it means to be Black. Understand that the American school system is a school system. It's not necessarily an education system. And if you want your kids to feel empowered and to have that sense of agency, they're probably not going to see that in the standard curriculum that they get in the school environment. So one of the most important things my mom did for me was, I went to school and I did what they told me to do, but we went to Black history classes on the weekend, and we had books like Before the Mayflower and the Autobiography of Malcolm X that she had us reading in elementary school. And having that framework for understanding how society works and how people respond to you is really powerful and helpful, and something that we have to be proactive about providing for our children, because the broader society and education system is not going to do that.
And what Dr. Benson is talking about is right on. She's 100% right with all that she's saying. And, we have looked at that term in general is racial socialization. How do you prepare your kids for the world? That could be preparing for bias. What do you do when you are stopped by the police? That could be how you interface with the world. Like she's saying, what does it mean to be a Black person? I was reading similarly all kinds of amazing books and of the accomplishments and the beauty that it is to be Black. So knowing that Black is good, Black is beautiful, look at what we've built, is a very different narrative than what we hear, And then also, I feel like my son, when I see things when you sit down and watch a cartoon or a movie, and you're like, oh, no, that's not right, that's racist, and calling that out so that they're able to then assess for themselves, oh, why are there no Black kids in this movie? Why have I only seen Black people portrayed in that way, and trying to give them a different narrative for that, I think is so important. Having Black pictures on the wall, going to, whatever you can do to kind of erase that previous narrative and say that there is, of course, beauty and brilliance in being Black. That's critical. I agree with you, Dr. Benson.
I think they said, okay, I love it. I really only watched Black movies when I was a little kid. I don't know what they were raising me to be a little activist. I watched Roots when I was 8. I don't know what they were thinking, but Professor Dennis, we have a question over here that says, I'm going to try to slide it over, but it says, how early do you think these conversations should start happening?
So I have mixed feelings on this. I mean, I think certainly by the time your child expresses some racist experience to them, or some fear of police officers or some other government official, by then at least you need to start having some sort of conversations with them. I think one way to think about it may depend on the maturity of your child in terms of how deep of a conversation you have, what language you use. I know both our doctors are quite familiar with, right? You want to use child appropriate language depending on their age and their own individual development. This is something that lawyers who work with youth also think about. But so if you want to start before they sort of give you that first indication that they're understanding about race, or they've had a racist experience, right, then just be mindful of their age, their development. I think each child is different. You can't always begin to have these conversations very early on. That being said, it's kind of a waffly response. One of my avenues of research touches on something that Dr. Vincent has mentioned, which is police violence and how it can traumatize children. And in a very short article I wrote, I challenged the notion that these police or law enforcement education programs, so cops in schools and officer friendly and the crime dog, that they do a service. And when I say that, it's because very early on, ages 3, 4, 5, in daycares and preschools, educators and community first responders are trying to explain to children that these are the individuals you should go to when you need help. And these are the individuals you should seek out when you have a problem. And so given that that kind of conversation begins early on, I think it may be even by, age 5 or age 6, that children can begin to understand that not all police are your friend. Not all police are there to help you. For the stories we hear about the child in the car when their parent is being pulled over and they're nervous, right? And they're very young. We already know, even at that very young age, 5 or 6, they have already begun to internalize some fear of law enforcement. And so I would suggest that maybe even 3 or 4 or 5, when they begin to get that community education about first responders and law enforcement, and they're your friends and they're always there to help you, that is true in some sense. But it may be that you want to temper that, particularly if they have accidentally seen some sort of police violence on TV, or if a friend has said something to them. So it's a little bit of a waffly answer, but I think maybe the first instance will be exposure to police officers, at least when we're talking about the criminal legal system. Very early on, children are taught about police officers. And so very early on, we might want to begin to think about having some counteracting conversations or some realistic conversations, again, in an age-appropriate, child-friendly way that depends on your child's particular abilities.
Okay, thank you for that. I see the rest of the panel was over there giving the nod. We were all agreeing. Yeah. Okay. So we have a lot of questions over here and not that much time. So I'm going to show the next question. Anyone can answer. Maybe even Jamil, you might have an answer about this, and Dan Gillison. This question is about training for psychiatrists, but besides amazing resources like these panelists, are there other resources for psychiatrists in training who are not people of color, because we got to stop asking all the people of color to do the work, to pursue more formal cultural awareness? I.e., the question seems to be asking, how can we give some resources to these non-Black people so they can get it together? Anyone have ideas?
When you look at psychiatry being between 12 to 16% African American psychologists, and psychiatrists being 3% African American, you must have cultural competency training part of the system that we have right now in terms of when I, as a Black man, go to a mental health professional, they may, if they're not culturally competent, they will address topically the symptoms and never get to the root cause. So that cultural competency training is critically important, and we are a proponent of it, and we're supporting that training in our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. We will not try to get inside of the field of psychiatry and train a psychiatrist, but we will advocate for that cultural competency training for psychiatrists and other behavioral health, mental health, behavioral health experts that they need to take this training. And we want to be at the table helping to advocate for that and pushing for that.
Thank you, Dan Gillis. And Sarah Vincent, a training director here. Tell me how can we, or do we need to help them? Oh, tell me, what's the answer?
So part of the discussion has to be that there is no single Black experience, right? So if you are a Black 8-year-old boy in Prince George's County versus the Mississippi Delta versus the South Side of Chicago, your experiences are very different. So I don't want anybody who's watching thinking I can go read the chapter in X book about Black people and think I know sort of how to deal with my Black patients, because you will not. And so one of the things that's important to do is be humble and learn about the experiences of Black people in your community and understand what they bring into their encounters with you. And that means asking questions and doing some extra work and talking to folks about their experience. And as you said, listening. One of the other things that, you know, I think we and Jamil touched on it, but this idea of adultism, that we don't value the voice of children and bring them into the room, even when we're talking about things that are impacting them directly, that we can see the conversion of like racism and adultism, especially when it comes to Black kids, that we have to listen to Black kids. And that's part of being competent and humble in doing this work.
Jamil, anything else to add? Or they got it all covered?
No, this panel is so amazing. No, they have it all covered. I would just, you know, from NAMI New York City's perspective, I would definitely echo what Dan said, and that, you know, even if we aren't as an organization directly involved in training psychiatrists, we absolutely want to make sure that we're one, advocating for culturally competent resources, so that, you know, these psychiatrists can get the training, and so that we can get, you know, both training for non-Black psychiatrists, but then also so we can get more Black folks in the field itself, you know. But we also will be working to, you know, working to advocate for that, and any policies that we can help push, we absolutely will make sure that we're supporting that. So if you know of any, please send them my way. I love adding new stuff to our policy platform.
Okay, good.
So let me know.
We will send, we will put it on, well, I don't know. They told me kids don't like Twitter.
May I say this to you all? This is also about workforce development. If you think about, as all of you all are growing up, and as you are growing up, your parents took you to an ear, nose, and throat specialist. They took you to a pediatrician. They took you to a dentist. They may not have taken you to the type of professional that you are. So as we're looking to bring people into this field, we have to get to them early. And we need you to help us get to them, to let them see who you are and what you do and what you've chosen to be your life's work, so that they can role model you, if you will, and say, I want to be like Dr. Hairston. I want to be like Dr. Vincent. I want to be like Dr. Herd Garris. And I want to be a professor like Dr. Dennis. You guys are the hidden heroes, and we're not going to see you on TV. So this platform right here is critically important. And workforce development is, you know, we can do all the things like we're working on in our previous one. We talked about 988 legislation. So when we get that passed, that means a whole nother ecosystem and a supply chain of services instead of 911, 988. But if you don't have the workforce to have that model of mental health support, then it's for naught. So we've got to do the workforce development, and we need the role models and we need them in every venue to get to our young people to say, when I grow up, I want to be like her, him.
Yes. Thank you, Dan. That is why it was very important that we have this Black Psychiatry platform. That's why I felt like it was important for me to create this and to collaborate with everyone, because people think that psychiatrists are unicorns, that they don't exist. I have medical students who tell me when they interview at Howard, the real HU, that they've never seen a Black psychiatrist before. So that's why it was important for us all to make sure that this is known. So thank you all for that. I'm going to send this next question to maybe Dr. Hurd Garris and Professor Dennis, because this question is about, for those who are not psychiatrists, who are not involved in mental health, is there other information for other medical professionals who are not in mental health per se, like even dentists, pediatricians, even lawyers, for how to address these issues with Black mental health in our children and families and just all the generations? Are there other resources?
Professor Dennis, do you want to take it first?
Sure. I think my answer is going to be no. And the reason I say that is because what happens with lawyers who are interested in incorporating mental health issues or incorporating mental illness issues or understanding trauma and the impact on our clients or our cases is that we look to the medical literature and we look to the social science literature. And so we also look to those organizations which create that research and which create programming surrounding that research. In the legal field, we're very much interested in making sure that we have science-based information, science-backed information. I can't believe I'm having to say that now because I know that's such a big, problem. Do we follow the science or do we follow someone else? But so as a professional in a different discipline, completely outside of medicine, we look to medical professionals to help us understand what we need to know and then how to incorporate that into our professional practice. So for example, in law in particular, where you're working with vulnerable populations or underserved populations or at-risk populations, we now have this new approach to lawyering, which we call trauma-informed lawyering. So it's recognizing that your client comes in with likely numerous different types of trauma, and that the trauma they've experienced not necessarily just affected their case, but affects how they relate to the lawyer, right? How you can actually create re-traumatization if you're not familiar with their initial trauma, when you're trying to ask them about a case or ask them if they've been abused or ask them if there's anything in their background. And then also, of course, as we talked about, how trauma can actually affect their case in particular. And so what I want to suggest to you in that long-winded way is that even if you're in a different discipline than psychiatry or psychology, look to those fields and look to the sociologists and others who are researching mental health and mental illness, and let them lead you. And if they don't yet have information for your particular profession, write that organization and say, hey, I think we need to be thinking about this. Can you generate some materials, or reach out to NAMI, or reach out to the APA or any of the psychiatry organizations and say, look, I'm a dentist in this field, or I'm a plumber, what do I need to know, right? I think that's the way to do it. But so truthfully, what we do is we look to the science and we look to the medical professionals and the social scientists.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. I mean, I don't know that we know for every different group or organization what's out there, but I certainly am a person who feels like you should ask, and not only ask, stay on them, be persistent until that comes to fruition. So I can give you an example with the American Academy of Pediatrics. As we said, I'm a pediatrician, and we didn't have a group that discussed racism, minority children. The thrust of the organization is that we care for all children, and we, want the health and well-being of all children. But for me, if a conversation about structural racism wasn't happening, then we weren't really doing that. So that's why, you know, I banded with some other leaders in the group, and we formed this section. And through that, we've brought a lot of issues for that pediatricians haven't had the platform to discuss, or the space, or the, you know, the venue, what have you, to discuss those things and create ways that pediatricians can get involved and change some stuff. Last year, I think it was last year, the AAP finally published a statement about racism and how racism impacts the mental and physical health of children. Like, it just happened. And I think that's because we've been drilling away saying, hey, this impacts health and we need you to say something. And so I think that's been really good. And I think other organizations have followed or are following suit in that way. So cause that good trouble that we were talking about, because I'm not sure that every organization has done that. And then also, I don't know how relatable this is to other folks, but for pediatricians, you know, mental health is become something that we do. And I'm not sure that it's always been that case, but it's hard to find doctors like Dr. Vincent, right? And so part of our training has focused a lot more on mental health, anxiety, and depression, and being able to manage those illnesses, and knowing when and if we need to partner with a psychiatrist and how to do that. And some practices have co-located child psychiatrists within our primary care space. And I think that's beautiful and amazing. So we do have more training, but with respect to Black mental health and structural racism, that's not happening. So.
Yes. So definitely collaborative care is very important, and thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Hurd-Garris. And I don't know if you could get Dr. Vincent to come to your clinic in Chicago, but we need her up there. We need her for all the kids. And I think this question, Dr. Vincent or Dr. Hurd-Garris, but Dr. Vincent, I know you know the answer to this question. Are there any books you would recommend for younger children, and I'm going to add to that, or for their parents and those who are treating younger children that have witnessed a racist encounter? And I know that you might have a book coming out that might help with the families of these children as well.
So I want to give a shout out to Dr. Marietta Collins, who's part of our faculty at Morehouse School of Medicine. And she's one of the co-authors of a book, Something Happened in Our Town. And it actually was a New York Times bestseller last week about just this issue, and talking to kids about it. And it's really well illustrated and well done, written by 3 psychologists. So I would definitely recommend that one. But one of the things that I would say, just from how we approach this perspective, is that we don't want to wait until something bad happens. We want them to be equipped with the language and the framework to understand it before it happens. So you want to, sort of that conversation we were having earlier about books like Before the Mayflower or the autobiography of Malcolm X or Watching Ruth. You want them to have that lens so that it's not this reactionary thing when there's a crisis, but that they sort of go through life with this ability to sort of see things for what they are.
Thank you for that. Also, Ibram Kendi has a book, Anti-Racist Baby. So that's another book that's a good one to look into. I just ordered that. I ordered that for me or my godson. So that's another one that you could look out for. So we are.
Dr. Harrison, can I just say real quick that we also got an amazing book by Vashti Harrison. An amazing psychiatrist has sent that to us. I want to say it's Little Heroes or Little Men in History. And then she also has another book, I think Little Leaders, is about Black women in history that we have loved. And every page is a new, they have drawn it like a cartoon, but it's like a new Black hero that we've learned about in history. So I think that has been really great too. Doesn't talk about something that's happened, but it's a part of that piece we were talking about with racial socialization and ethnic and cultural pride. So I just want to slip that in there real quick.
And circling back to John Lewis, so there's the March graphic novels. The 3 are back behind me. I was so excited when I realized he was my congressman when I moved to Atlanta, but this is a great resource for kids too about that framing of these issues and activism.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Some Black psychiatrists have all of the resources. All right. So we're coming up on the end of the panel and we still have questions over here. So please make sure that we go to YouTube and Facebook to answer them for our panelists. You have access to go and check them out. But I just want to thank you for coming, and I want to give every panelist the opportunity to have any closing remarks or any messages, any asks, any tells, anything that you want to make sure that we leave the take-home points with this panel before the next one. Let's start with Professor Dennis.
So one thing I was thinking about, I know much of our conversation has focused on the criminal legal system, or at least most of my comments have focused on the criminal legal system. But I also do think about mental health and mental illness in connection with youth in family justice issues and as well in juvenile justice issues. And so I just think it's very important for people to understand that while we have a lot of emphasis on the carceral state, the criminal legal system, there are other of the law that are greatly affected by trauma, that are affected by racism, that are affected by discrimination, and how our youth experience those. And so again, it's not just criminal legal system, it's also the family legal system, family justice legal system, and the juvenile justice system.
Thank you for that. Jamil, our peer advocate here to drop all the knowledge and tell us what the Black community and you really need. Please tell us any parting words for us, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say, one, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's been really fascinating conversation. I feel an enlightening conversation. So I feel very honored to be on this panel. I would say that one, please go to NAMINYC.org so you can see our programs and resources. You can also go to our advocacy section so you can find out how you get more involved in New York City advocacy. We're doing a panel tomorrow actually called Save Lives, Don't Take Them, Removing NYPD from the Crisis Response System. So please go on NAMINYC.org so you go to our public events page and you can register for it. So I think in addition to just, NAMI NYC plugs, I think that this is a really powerful time and moment in our society. So I think I love one of the things we talked about on this panel is the importance of listening to community members. So I would say, I think in this moment, it's really important for us to listen to community members, listen to Black youth, listen to Black folks to hear what they need. And I think we really have to go, we should really be pushing for big transformational items. So this is honestly the time to do it. So whether that's removing NYPD or, removing NYPD from schools or, divesting from NYPD, or if it's, just really rethinking the way that we handle Black mental health, I think this is absolutely the time to do it. So I would encourage folks to dream big and really organize and figure out how to accomplish it. And thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Jamil. And Dan Gillison, you already told me, sent a message that now that Jamil is here, you can just leave. But I mean, he's done so much. But tell me, Dan, is there anything that you want to part with before we exit the panel?
A couple of things. One, the Basics on Demand. There's a PDF inside of that curriculum that a caregiver or a parent can download, and it will help them with the navigation of the system if in fact they have to go into the mental health system in terms of resourcing. The other thing is our helpline, 1-800-950-6264. So that's another resource. And I'll close with our values: hope, inclusion, empowerment, compassion, and fairness. Those are the NAMI values. And as we look at our values, I think there was a quote earlier, and the World Health Organization had this quote: "There is no physical health without mental health." So that is what we're all about. And it's just such a pleasure to be with you all to talk about this. And last, we have another program called NAMI Sharing Hope that is a guide for our community for mental health. And it's called NAMI Sharing Hope. And we would encourage you to check that out as well. So we always are appreciative of the opportunity to talk with you all and to be a part of the discussion and the resources. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you for what you do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being here. Dr. Hurd-Garris, you've taught us so much. Is there anything else that you need to say? We need to be armed and ready to go out in this world and protect these Black children, beautiful Black and brown children here. Anything else? Any more tips? I know I've got you here. I know you like to do things with CNN, so please tell me what I'm here on my screen.
I would say two things. One is policy change. I think it's so important that we have people out on the front lines, marching, protesting, doing all the things that we know create change. I also want to make sure that at every level, we're advocating for policy change. So whether that's within our school systems, whether that's within the criminal legal system, whether that's within our own organizations, changing these racist policies will also lead to lasting changes. The second thing I would like to say is reparations. We need to have a serious conversation about reparations and trying to level the playing field for Black and brown people. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that.
I feel like we need another hour after that.
I know. Now she just brought reparations. Thank goodness we're going to be talking about Black wealth and mental health next month, Dr. Vincent, because I don't know what's going to come first, the next stimulus check or reparations. But Dr. Vincent, can you please, and also for you who don't know, Dr. Vincent is my panel partner in crime. She's who I text in the middle of the night and early in the morning, like, who can we get? Please help me. What do we need to be doing next? So Dr. Vincent, just thank you. And I always say that I'm going to be like Dr. Vincent when I grow up. So any parting words that you have for us, Dr. Vincent, any goals, any steps, any tips? We need some help.
Yes, so I think you were trying to tee me up to talk about Ruth Shibenai's book, and I sort of missed it. So I will talk about that. Social Injustice and Mental Health. It'll be out in January, and it's not child focused, but it does have chapters on the child protective system, the educational system, the legal system chapter talks about DJJ. So with a child psychiatrist co-editor, of course, it's going to address child issues. And I want to leave with encouraging the people who are mental health professionals or working with children not to see this as an extra thing or a bonus thing or an added thing, but see it as an integral thing to your work if you say you are helping these children. There is a quote by James Baldwin that says, "It is certain in any case that ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. As adults in children's lives, you have power. As providers, you have power. So you must learn about these things if we are going to help these populations and these children."
Thank you, Dr. Vincent. Always inspiring us all. And like I said, we have so many comments over here. I can't even get to all of them. So I just want to say thank you to each one of the panelists. Like each one of you, I am just eternally grateful for you taking your time and dropping this knowledge for free for the Black community. So thank you. And I just want to make sure that they have all your information. I will post on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, all of this information. And let me just say thank you to the institution that pays me, Howard University, for supporting me in this effort, and also to the group that raised me, the Black Psychiatrists of America. So thank you to both of those groups for allowing this to happen. And if you don't know, if you didn't know, just know that you can follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Also, you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram. I'm getting into the Twitter now. thanks to Dr. Jordan. So I do have some tweets. I say whatever I like, and I support the Black community in all ways. So please make sure you follow me on Twitter, follow at Black Psychiatry on Twitter and Instagram. We are looking for Black psychiatrists to feature, especially if you are accepting new patients, if you're doing tele, if you're doing anything like that, please, because I get so many messages every day between Twitter and Instagram about finding a Black psychiatrist. So please help our community, whether it's a talk, whether it's an Instagram live, whether it's providing services, we need that. So shout outs to Black Psychiatrists of America. Thank you to Howard University. Thank you to all of the residents and students who participated. I will leave this up on YouTube so you can continue to watch and take notes if we were moving too fast. So thank you for that. And everyone, have a good night. Thank you. Bye.